My stepdaughter stood in my living room holding a document with my signature on it. A signature I had never written. She was smiling the way people smile when they believe they have already won. What she didn't know was that the attorney sitting in the car outside my house that Tuesday morning wasn't there by coincidence, and that the folder in my lap contained every text message, every bank record, and every forged page she had produced over the previous 14 months. But I need to back up, because you need to understand who I am before you understand what they tried to do to me. My name is Raymond Gerald Kowalski. I am 68 years old. I spent 31 years as a civil engineer for the city of Cleveland, Ohio, designed 4 bridges that are still standing, raised 1 daughter alone after my first wife passed, and built the house I live in now with my own hands on a half-acre lot in Medina County in 1991. Not hired out, built it myself on weekends and evenings over the course of 2 years, with help from my brother Frank and a neighbor named Pete, who knew more about electrical work than anyone I have ever met before or since. When people ask me what I'm most proud of, I tell them the Lorraine Road overpass, because that's the professional answer, and it's true. But the real answer is the house. The real answer has always been the house. I married Connie DeLuca in 2009 when I was 53 and she was 49, and we had both been alone long enough to understand exactly what we were choosing when we chose each other. She was warm and funny and direct in a way that I had missed for years, and she had a daughter from her first marriage named Tara, who was 26 at the time and living in Columbus, and who seemed, in those early years, to genuinely like me. Connie passed away from ovarian cancer in 2019, 14 months after diagnosis, and the grief of that is not something I will describe in detail here because it belongs to me and to her and to the people who loved her. What I will say is that after Connie died, Tara became the closest thing I had to immediate family. She called regularly. She came to visit. She helped me sort through Connie's belongings in a way that was gentle and practical, and for which I was genuinely grateful. I trusted her. I trusted her completely, the way you trust someone who has sat with you in your worst grief. That trust was the first thing she used against me. The house, by the time any of this happened, had become worth considerably more than I had paid to build it. Medina County had grown substantially in the 20 years since I broke ground, and the half-acre lot with mature trees and a finished basement, and the particular quality of construction that comes from someone building their own home rather than flipping it, had appreciated in ways that would have seemed implausible to the younger version of me, pouring the foundation on a Saturday morning, with Frank handing me coffee and telling me I was out of my mind. An appraiser had come through 18 months prior for insurance purposes, and given me a number that I folded into my wallet and carried around for 2 days, taking it out periodically to look at it. I had no plans to sell. This was where Connie and I had been happy together. This was where I intended to stay. Tara knew the number. I had told her, during one of her visits, in the way you tell family things, easily, without calculation, because you assume the information is safe. I understand now that the moment I said it, something shifted. I cannot prove this, but looking back at the timeline of what followed, the sequence makes a particular kind of sense when you place that conversation at the beginning of it. The first sign was small enough that I almost didn't register it. About 8 months after Connie's passing, Tara started asking about my finances in ways she never had before. Not bluntly. Tara was never blunt. It was the one quality she and her mother had not shared. She asked about it sideways, through questions that sounded like concern. Had I looked into whether my pension was structured optimally for my situation? Had I thought about consolidating my accounts somewhere easier to manage? She mentioned a financial advisor she'd heard good things about, a man named Bricker, who worked out of an office in Akron. She mentioned him twice, which I noted without acting on it. I told myself she was being helpful. She had just lost her mother and was redirecting her energy toward taking care of things. This was a reasonable interpretation, and it was wrong. By the spring of the following year, the questions had shifted. She started asking about the house directly. What were my long-term plans for it? Had I thought about whether the maintenance was becoming a burden? She mentioned, once, a senior community in Fairlawn that a friend of hers had moved her father into and found wonderful. I said I had no plans to leave my home. She said, of course, she just wanted me to know my options. She said it with complete warmth. I accepted the warmth and filed the conversation under nothing to worry about and did not think about it again for 3 weeks, at which point something else happened that made me go back and think about it quite differently. I had been having a contractor look at the roof. It was due for an inspection, nothing urgent, just maintenance. And he mentioned while he was packing up his tools that someone had called his office asking about the property, asking specifically whether there had been any structural work done recently or any issues identified. The caller had not left a name. The contractor thought it was probably a realtor doing a market survey, which happens. He mentioned it only in passing. I thanked him and showed him out, and then stood in my kitchen for a moment after the door closed, and a feeling I did not yet have a name for settled in my chest, like a stone settling into mud. That evening, I called my brother Frank. Frank is 64, still sharp, retired from the Postal Service 2 years ago, and has the particular gift of people who have spent decades paying attention to human behavior at close range. He can hear something off in a voice from 6 states away. I told him about the calls from Tara, the questions, the financial advisor she kept mentioning, the contractor's comment about someone inquiring about the property. I told him I was probably being paranoid. Frank was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Ray, you built that house with your own hands? How much is it worth now?" I told him. Another silence, then, "Get yourself a lawyer, not one anyone recommended to you, one you find yourself." I said I thought I was overreacting. Frank said, "Then it cost you a consultation fee and some peace of mind. Get a lawyer." I got a lawyer. Her name was Patricia Hennessy, and she had an office in Medina proper, 3 blocks from the courthouse, that smelled of coffee and old paper in a way I found immediately trustworthy. She was 61, direct, unhurried, and she listened to everything I said without interrupting. When I finished, she asked me 3 questions. Had anyone recently suggested I was having memory problems or difficulty managing my affairs? Had anyone recommended a specific attorney or financial advisor to me in the past year? And had I signed any documents related to my property or finances in the past 18 months that I might not fully remember? The first 2 answers were yes. The third answer was no. I was quite sure of that. I did not sign things without reading them, and I did not sign things I didn't fully understand. It was an engineering habit that had saved me from bad contracts more than once. Patricia wrote in her notepad. Then she said she wanted to pull records on anything filed under my name in the county in the past 2 years. What she found took 10 days. I spent those 10 days continuing my routine. My morning walks, my coffee with Frank on Thursdays, the Wednesday evening model train club I had joined the previous winter, and which had become something I genuinely looked forward to in a way that slightly embarrassed me, and which I had decided to stop being embarrassed about. I returned Tara's calls when she called. I kept my voice easy and warm. I told her nothing. Patricia called me on a Friday afternoon and asked me to come in Monday morning. I was there when the office opened. The document she put on the desk in front of me was a durable power of attorney. It was dated 11 months ago. It had my name on it, and at the bottom, a signature. I looked at the signature for a long time. I am an engineer. I spent 31 years reading drawings and specifications and contracts, and one thing that work gives you is attention to exact detail. The signature was not mine. It was close. Someone had clearly studied my signature, had gotten the R and the K approximately right, but the connecting stroke between the first and last name was wrong, too deliberate, too even, where my own handwriting has a slight break there, a habit left over from a wrist injury in my 30s. The document named Tara DeLuca as my agent with broad financial authority, including authority over real estate. Patricia told me a forensic examiner had already reviewed a copy. The examiner's preliminary finding was consistent with what I was looking at. The second document was a listing agreement. My property, listed with a real estate agency in Akron, for a price that was, I calculated it in my head in about 4 seconds, significantly below current market value. The listing had been created 2 months ago. My name was on it. My signature was on it. I had never seen it before in my life. I sat in Patricia's office and I looked at those 2 documents and I breathed very carefully. In through the nose, slow, the way I had learned to breathe in the weeks after Connie died, when breathing itself had required a kind of conscious decision. My hands were on the arms of the chair, and they were not shaking. I had decided on the drive over, somewhere on Route 18, passing the old dairy farm that was now a subdivision, that I was not going to shake. Whatever was on Patricia's desk, I was going to look at it with steady hands and a clear head. I am an engineer. I solve problems. This was a problem. Who is the listing agency in Akron connected to? I asked. Patricia slid a 3rd page across the desk. The real estate agency had a partial ownership stake held through an LLC by a man named Derek Sutter. Derek Sutter was Tara's boyfriend of 3 years. I had met him 4 times. He had seemed quiet and unremarkable. I understood now that I had been looking at him incorrectly. There was one more document. Patricia had found, through the court records, that a petition for guardianship had been filed against me 6 weeks ago. A hearing was scheduled in 5 weeks. If a court appointed a guardian over my affairs, on the grounds that I was no longer competent to manage them, that guardian could authorize a property sale. My property, through Tara as guardian, to Derek Sutter's agency's client, at below market value. The full shape of it was visible now, clean and complete, like an engineering diagram. Input, process, output. They had designed something, and they had been building it methodically for over a year. 5 weeks, I said. Yes, Patricia said. We need to move quickly. That night, I drove to Frank's house instead of calling. He opened the door and looked at my face and stepped back to let me in without a word, and we sat in his kitchen. The same kitchen where we used to sit as boys doing homework while our mother cooked. And I told him everything. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment, looking at the table, and then he looked up at me and said, "What do you need? Not what should you do, not what are you going to do. What do you need? That is my brother." I told him I needed him to not call Tara, to not mention any of this to anyone we both knew, and to be available if I needed him to come with me somewhere in the next few weeks. He said all 3 of those things were already done. I drove home through the dark Ohio countryside, and I did not turn on the radio because I needed the quiet, and I let myself feel everything on that drive. The anger, which was enormous and clean, and the grief, which was different from the anger. The grief of understanding that someone had watched me bury my wife and then started making plans. I let it all come through me on that drive, and by the time I pulled into my own driveway, I had decided that I was done feeling it and ready to work. The following 3 weeks were the most focused and systematic work I had done since the Lorraine Road project. Patricia brought in a forensic document examiner named Charles Webb, a retired FBI analyst who now did private work, a small compact man with very steady hands and the manner of someone who has spent his career being the most precise person in any room he enters. He examined both forged documents for 2 hours in Patricia's conference room while I waited, and then he came out and said, without preamble, "Both signatures are forgeries. I can demonstrate this with certainty. I would be pleased to do so in court." I thanked him. He nodded once and left. I went to my own physician, Dr. Okonkwo, who had been my doctor for 12 years and knew me well enough to have standing opinions about my dietary choices and my insufficient attention to my blood pressure. I explained what I needed and why. He looked at me for a moment with an expression that combined professional concern with personal outrage, and then he said, "Sit down, Ray. Let's do this properly." I spent 90 minutes completing every cognitive and neurological assessment in his battery. Language, memory, executive function, processing speed, spatial reasoning. Dr. Okonkwo reviewed the results and said, "You scored in the normal to high normal range across every single measure. I will put that in writing, I will sign it, and I will personally deliver it to any court that asks." I told him I appreciated that. He said, "This is what I'm for." I also went, carefully and specifically, to find out what I could about Bricker, the financial advisor Tara had recommended twice. What I found was not criminal. He was a licensed advisor, but his client list had an interesting feature, which was a number of elderly clients who had subsequently transferred significant assets to family members or third parties in ways that had later been questioned by other relatives. Not enough for any formal action. Enough to understand the role he was intended to play in what had been planned for me. I gave everything I found to Patricia, and she added it to the file. The Adult Protective Services report was filed on a Thursday. Patricia explained that we were legally required to report once we had evidence of elder financial abuse, and that filing proactively before the hearing was both correct and strategic. The caseworker assigned was a man named Gerald Torres. The coincidence of the name made me smile, just briefly. Who came to my house on a Saturday morning and sat at my kitchen table and asked me careful questions for 2 hours. He looked around the house while he was there, at the construction, at the details, and at some point he said, "You built this yourself?" I said I had. He nodded slowly and wrote something down, and I had the impression he was writing down more than just my answer to the question. I called Tara on a Wednesday. I had rehearsed what I was going to say, the way I used to rehearse presentations before county council meetings, not scripted, but structured, knowing the beginning and the end, and trusting myself to navigate the middle. I told her I'd been doing a lot of thinking. I told her she was right, that maybe the house was more than I needed on my own, that I was starting to feel like it might be time to talk about options. I used the word overwhelmed. I used the phrase, "I think I might need some help with some of this." I heard her voice change on the other end of the line. A warming, a brightening, the sound of someone hearing what they've been waiting to hear. She said she was so glad I was open to talking. She said she had some ideas she'd been wanting to share. She said she'd come over Saturday with some paperwork, just to start getting things organized, just to give me some clarity. I said that sounded wonderful. I said I'd make lunch. After I hung up, I sat at the kitchen table for a moment. The table Connie and I had bought at an estate sale in 2011. Solid walnut, too big for the dining room really, but neither of us had been willing to give it up after we saw it. I put my hand flat on the surface of it, on the wood grain. Then I got up and called Patricia and told her Saturday was the day. I called my daughter Carol next. Carol is my daughter from my first marriage, 41 years old, a pediatric nurse in Pittsburgh, the most practically competent person I know after my brother Frank. I had not told her any of this yet, partly to protect her, and partly because I needed to have the plan in place before I told anyone else what was happening. When I told her, there was a silence of about 15 seconds, Carol processing, ordering, deciding, and then she said, "I'm driving in Friday night. Don't argue with me, Dad." I didn't argue with her. I was, if I'm honest, enormously relieved. She arrived Friday at 9:30 in the evening, having driven from Pittsburgh after her shift, and she came through the back door the way she always does, and she hugged me in the kitchen, and then pulled back and looked at my face and said, "Are you okay?" I told her I was better than I had been in a while, actually. She looked at me for a moment, and then she nodded, because Carol knows me, and she said, "Okay, show me everything." We went through it all at the kitchen table. The forged documents, Charles Webb's findings, Dr. Okonkwo's assessment, the guardianship petition, the connection between the listing agency and Derek Sutter, the file on Bricker. Carol went through every page with the focused, methodical attention of someone who reads medical charts for a living and understands that details matter. She asked sharp questions. She went back and reread things. When she was done, she looked up at me and said very quietly, "She sat with us at Mom's, at Connie's funeral, Dad." I said I knew. Carol pressed her lips together and looked at the table for a moment, and then she looked back up and said, "What time are they coming?" Patricia arrived at 9 Saturday morning. Her colleague, a specialist in elder law who had worked on several cases of this specific type, arrived at 9:15. Gerald Torres from Adult Protective Services arrived at 9:30. A deputy from the Medina County Sheriff's Office, arranged by Patricia, who said that the seriousness of the documents warranted a formal presence, pulled into the driveway at 9:45 and parked behind Frank's truck. Because Frank had arrived at 9 without being asked, and I had not told him to stay away because I hadn't wanted to. At 11 o'clock, Tara's car came up the drive. She parked and got out, and Derek Sutter got out of the passenger side, which I had not expected, but also, somehow had. He was carrying a briefcase. She had a smile on that was entirely characteristic of her. Warm, genuine-looking, the specific smile I had trusted for 10 years. They walked to the front door, and I opened it before they knocked. The morning was cold and bright, the particular brightness of an October morning in northern Ohio, when the sky has gone completely clear after a week of cloud. The maples in the front yard were at their absolute peak, every shade of orange and red, the light coming through them in a way that Gerald would have stopped to look at. Tara took in the yard, the maples, and then looked at me with her warm smile. "Ray," she said, "you look good." "Come in," I said. She came around the corner into the living room and stopped. Derek came around behind her and stopped. The room was arranged the way it always was. The good couch, the chairs, the coffee table, the wood stove in the corner that I light in October and keep going until April. But the people in it were not the people she had expected. Patricia near the window, her colleague in the chair by the bookcase, Gerald Torres on the far side of the room, Carol on the couch, spine straight, hands in her lap, looking at Tara with an expression I will not attempt to describe. Frank standing in the doorway to the kitchen, arms folded, saying nothing. Tara stood very still. Derek took a small step backward, which told me something about where the courage in this particular operation had actually resided. Tara's eyes moved from face to face with the rapid assessment of someone who has been caught and is calculating, and I watched the calculation happen in real time, and I felt nothing that surprised me. "Ray," she said, and her voice was still smooth, still warm, still entirely controlled. "What is this?" "Sit down, Tara," I said, and I let every bit of the warmth I had maintained for 14 months leave my voice, cleanly, finely, the way you release a tool when the job is done. She didn't sit. She looked at me, and then at the room, and she chose, visibly, to try to manage the situation. Because managing situations was what she did, and she was good at it, and she had not yet fully understood that this situation was not available to be managed. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," she said, still smooth. "Derek and I are here because we're worried about you. We've been worried for a while, and we thought if we could just sit down together and look at some options." "Patricia," I said. Patricia opened the folder on her knee and said, in a clear and entirely even voice, "The durable power of attorney filed under Raymond Kowalski's name 11 months ago has been examined by a forensic document specialist with 30 years of experience, including 15 years with the FBI. His finding is that the signature on that document is not Mr. Kowalski's. That is a felony in the state of Ohio. The property listing agreement filed with Sutter Realty in Akron 2 months ago contains a second forged signature on the same document, which is a second count." She looked up from the folder. "A guardianship petition filed 6 weeks ago will be answered formally on Monday, with the forensic findings, a complete cognitive assessment from Mr. Kowalski's physician of 12 years, showing normal to high normal function across all measured domains, and documentation of the relationship between Sutter Realty, its ownership structure, and Derek Sutter." She closed the folder. "I would recommend retaining counsel today." The silence after that was complete and long. The wood stove ticked. Outside, the maples moved slightly in a wind that didn't reach us inside. Derek Sutter sat down, not in a chair, but on the arm of the couch near the door, the way someone sits when they are positioning themselves near an exit. Tara remained standing, and I watched something in her face that I had never seen before. Not the warmth, not the management, not the smooth competence. Something younger and more cornered. Ray. Her voice had lost some of its smoothness. We were trying to help you. The house is too much for one person, you know it is. And after Connie, you've been alone, and we thought... You forged my name on a legal document, I said. You attempted to list my property without my knowledge or consent through a real estate agency with ownership ties to your partner. You filed a legal petition claiming I am cognitively incapable of managing my own affairs. I kept my voice quiet, level as a grade. Those are not the actions of someone trying to help me. Those are the actions of someone trying to take something from me. She looked at me. Really looked at me, for the first time since she'd walked in, not at the room or the people, but at me specifically. And what I saw in that look was complicated. There was the calculation, yes, still working, still looking for the angle, but underneath it, there was something else, something I hadn't expected. She was surprised. She had not believed I was capable of this. She had looked at a 68-year-old widower living alone in a house he'd built himself, and she had seen something that could be managed, something that would not see it coming. That miscalculation was the entire reason we were standing here on opposite sides of a room that had once felt, if not like family, then at least like something close to it. Carol spoke from the couch. She had been completely still through all of it, and when she spoke, everyone turned to look at her because she had been so still that the sound of her voice was startling. Tara, she said. Just the name, quiet, waiting until Tara looked at her. When she did, Carol said, My father sat with you every day of your mother's last week. He read to her when she couldn't sleep. He held her hand. A pause. And you looked at his house before she was cold. No anger in it, just the fact, stated plainly, dropped into the room like something heavy dropped from a height. The silence after that was the longest one yet. Tara's jaw moved. No words came. Derek Sutter stood up from the arm of the couch and said, We should go, in a voice that suggested he had understood several minutes ago that there was no version of this that ended well for anyone who stayed in the room. Tara looked at me one more time. I don't know what she was looking for. Whatever it was, I don't believe she found it. She turned and walked to the front door, and Derek followed her, and the door opened, and the bright October morning came briefly in, and the door closed, and they were gone. The room breathed out. Frank unfolded his arms. Carol put her face in her hands for a moment. Not crying, I knew her well enough to know that, just taking a moment in the dark behind her palms, and then she lifted her head and her eyes were clear. Patricia was already making a note. Gerald Torres was looking at his phone. The deputy came around from the back of the house where he'd been stationed and knocked, and I told him through the door that it was done and he could go. I went to the kitchen and put the kettle on because that was what needed doing. The legal process took 7 months in total. The guardianship petition was withdrawn within the deadline Patricia had given. The criminal matter involving the forged documents was referred to the county prosecutor's office and resulted, after investigation, in charges against both Tara and Derek Sutter. The investigation also produced evidence that Bricker, the financial advisor, had been aware of the scheme and had provided advice regarding how to structure the property transaction to minimize scrutiny. His license was referred to the state regulatory board. Tara entered a plea agreement and received probation and community service and a fine and a record that will follow her. Derek Sutter contested the charges, which extended the process considerably and did not improve his outcome. The real estate agency lost 2 significant listings in the aftermath of the publicity, which in a county the size of Medina tends to travel quickly. I had my estate documents redrawn entirely. New will, new healthcare directive, new powers of attorney designating Carol and Frank jointly, 2 people who had each demonstrated, in ways that required no interpretation, exactly what they would do with authority over my affairs. The attorney who drafted them was one Patricia recommended, a woman with 20 years of elder law practice who reviewed everything twice and called it thorough. I told her thorough was the minimum acceptable standard in my professional experience. She smiled and said she felt the same way. The house I did not sell. I did not even consider selling the house. I had some work done on the roof that the contractor had flagged, and I rebuilt the back fence section that had been needing attention, and I planted 3 new rose bushes along the south side that Connie had always talked about wanting, and that I had never gotten around to while she was alive, which was a thing I intended to correct. Frank came over on a Saturday in April, and we worked on the fence together the way we used to work on the house itself, handing things back and forth without much talking, the comfortable labor of 2 people who have been working alongside each other since they were young. And at the end of the day, we sat on the back porch with beers, and Frank said, "Good fence." And I said, "Good fence." And that was enough. Carol came for Thanksgiving. She cooked the turkey, which she has always insisted on doing because she has strong opinions about turkey, and I have learned not to argue with her about it. And we ate at the walnut table that was too big for the dining room and always would be. And afterward, we sat with our coffee, and she asked me how I was doing. Not about the case, not about Tara. Just how I was doing, how I was actually doing inside the ordinary life of it. I thought about the question honestly. "Better than I expected," I said. Some days it's still strange. I think about the years with Connie, and I think about who was in the room with us during those years and what was actually in their head, and that's a strange thing to sit with. I looked at my coffee. But I also think, your mother used to say that grief teaches you who people actually are, that it strips everything down to the real. I think that's true for other things too. I know who Frank is now. I know who you are. I know what this house is and what it means and who built it. I looked up at her. That's not nothing. That's actually quite a lot. Carol looked at me for a moment, and then she reached across the walnut table and put her hand over mine briefly, the way her mother used to. And then she picked up her coffee, and we sat together in the house I built and drank it while the November dark settled in around the windows and the wood stove did its work, and the maples in the front yard stood bare and patient against the sky, the way they have stood every November for 30 years, waiting for the thing they know how to do, which is to come back. I finished my coffee. I set the cup down on Connie's table. The house was quiet in the way it gets when it has been full of someone you love, and is now holding the warmth of them still. The wood stove ticked. The maples waited outside. Everything I had built was still standing, exactly where I had built it, exactly as I had intended it to stand. And I thought, sitting there in the warm and quiet of it, that this specifically, this ordinary and irreplaceable thing, was what they had tried to take from me and what I had not let them take, and that for as long as I was able to sit in this chair in this house I had made with my own hands, I did not intend to let anyone take it. The coffee was good. It had been a while since I had noticed how good it was. I noticed it now.